So far we have already implemented the ability to send crash and most importantly error information over to App Center, and we have already done that on an Android application. We see here a bunch of crashes and a bunch of errors that have happened as we use the application, the ones that we added ourselves, and we have explored some information about them. We also noticed how by default Analytics is already reporting some information right here. And all of this is currently only on the Android application here in App Center. If we navigate over to the iOS application, we are going to see absolutely nothing. So what I will do in this lecture is going over everything that we've done on Android and executing that on iOS as well. So I am going to run the application a few times. One of them, it is going to be crashed by this method that App Center provides to us through the crashes class. Then I am going to be crashing it as we did previously with Android with this exception that I am throwing. And then I am going to wrap this exception in a try-catch block, just like we have also done on Android as well, so that this is reported not as a crash but as an error, and that is also sending some properties. Of course, all of the code remains exactly the same. I am just going to be executing two different versions of the login button underscore clicked event handler. One when the application crashes, one when we catch the exception that made it crash. Of course, we don't need to make any more changes because everything is going to work exactly the same on Android. And on iOS, that is the purpose of Xamarin, and it works here with App Center as well. The only difference is that when the application runs, App Center is only using the connection to Android, and this time it is going to be using the connection to the iOS application. These applications in App Center, from which we have already retrieved the app secret. So let's go ahead and run this now on an iPhone simulator. Again, the first time I am not catching this exception, so this will crash the application. So I'm going to run it. I have here the application up and running, and if you remember correctly, the generated crash, the one that gets executed with the generate test crash method, is executed or generated when we navigate over to the add new book page or the new book page and click on the save button. And this indeed successfully crashes our application. I can click on continue and see that the application right now it is frozen. I'm sure it will eventually close. If I navigate over to App Center, then I am already here on the iOS project. And so far we have seen no data. And we even saw some quick start guides. But now if I navigate to diagnostics, and again I may need to wait a few minutes, I should be able to see that crash report. And while I wait for that crash report, if I navigate over to analytics, and here it has already loaded, I start to see some information, because all of this is added by default as soon as we register these two services from App Center through the app class. And we start seeing some information about the active users, the top devices, the OS distribution, the languages, and so on. Again, it is in the next lecture in which we are going to be adding more information here to analytics in the form of events that we will find over here to the left. But so far, we are already seeing some basic information. Let's navigate back to diagnostics, see if the information is ready. And indeed, it is now ready. And we see that first crash, the one that we have just simulated. We see currently no errors, just one single crash. And let me now navigate to that crash. And in here we are of course going to be seeing what we are already familiar with, the stack traces. And we can see the reports, from which device this happened, on what OS and at what time. And if we navigate to this report, we see all of the information that we have already seen exists on Android. So indeed, everything is exactly the same. It works exactly the same for both platforms. Now let's go ahead and test the application one more time. This time we're going to be navigating over to the login button and see this exception that should also crash the application, but that doesn't crash it with the generate test crash method that App Center provides. So I will run the application one more time, this time navigating over to the login view first. So from this login button, I navigate to the login page, click this button, and indeed the application crashes again successfully. So if I navigate over to App Center and go back to diagnostics, and maybe again wait a few minutes for App Center to receive the data, I should see a second type of crash being listed. After a few minutes then, that is exactly what we see. A second type of crash in here being listed, each of which has just passed one time. The status we saw back when we tested this on Android, how we could change it, and it is open on both. What did this happen? And of course, if we navigate to this one, we see exactly the same thing. The stack trace, the reports, the affected users, the devices, the OS, and in the reports, if we click on this instance of the crash, we see the exact same information. And so we know that crashes are being tracked by default as soon as we add these services when we initialize App Center from the app class. And the same things happen to a certain extent with analytics. We start to see some information being displayed inside of this tab as well. All from active users, to the devices they've been using, to the daily sessions they have, to the languages they use on their device, and the active users per version. So now let's test the last thing that we have implemented, and that is errors, tracking errors, which is going to be like identifying a certain thing that is crashing and simply catching that thing so it no longer crashes the application, but we still start reporting what is going on. So that is exactly what we did here in the click of the login button. We were throwing this exception that previously was crashing the application. But now we're going to be wrapping this in a try-catch block, so of course we know that we're going to catch the exception. So instead of the app crashing, we are going to be sending information to App Center. And we are already sending some properties as well, not just the exception. So let's go ahead and run this application one more time on the simulator. I am going to navigate back to the login page, click the login button, but this time the application will not crash. Click the login button and now nothing happens. And I've actually already pressed this a few times, so we may be seeing more than one error being tracked in here. I pressed the button too many times. But the reason why nothing is happening is because we are not doing anything. Of course, we throw the exception, but now we catch it, and here we're simply tracking the error over to App Center. We aren't letting the user know about any errors, so we don't see anything happening, but we know as developers that something is being sent to App Center. So let me go ahead and stop the application, and now navigate over to App Center. See if the errors are being already displayed. Once these errors appear, you can notice how indeed they are tracked differently. We see them as errors, not as crashes, and these, at least by the way that they are being displayed in here, can be identified as something less serious than the crashes, and these at least are not making the application crash. But we do see that in this case I have already a count of 3, I clicked that button more than once, and if I navigate to this, again we see something very similar to the crashes. The stack trace, the affected users, how many reports have there been in the last 30 days, the affected devices, the affected operating systems, and in the reports, in this case we see the 3 of them, and in each of them we're going to be able to see the same information that we're familiar with from the crashes. Now in this case, because I am already tracking properties, I also see them down below. So there you have it. Everything that we have already done on Android works exactly the same on iOS. On both of these applications that we have on App Center, we are now going to be seeing some information for some crashes, for some errors, and of course about the usage that is being tracked by default. In the next lecture then, let's add some tracking of events. So we see more information here on the Analytics tab. So far, all the information that we see is tracked by default, without us having to add any more code, just like it happened with the crashes on both Android and iOS. Now we're going to be doing something similar to what we did to track errors. But we're going to be able to track all kinds of events, because tracking events won't depend on any exceptions.